Ancient Egypt was one of the longest-lasting civilizations, spanning over 3,000 years. The Nile River was central to Egyptian civilization, providing water, transportation, and fertile soil. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the oldest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the only one still largely intact. Pharaohs were considered gods on earth, and were both political and religious leaders. The first pyramid built in Egypt was the Step Pyramid of Djoser, designed by the architect Imhotep. Hieroglyphics was the writing system used in ancient Egypt, consisting of pictures and symbols. The Rosetta Stone, discovered in 1799, was key to deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphics. The ancient Egyptians practiced mummification to preserve bodies for the afterlife. The Book of the Dead was a collection of spells and prayers to guide the deceased in the afterlife. The Sphinx, a limestone statue with a lion's body and a human head, stands near the Great Pyramid at Giza. Queen Hatshepsut was one of the few female pharaohs and ruled during the 18th dynasty. Akhenaten, known for his religious reforms, attempted to shift Egypt to monotheism, worshipping Aten, the sun disk. King Tutankhamun, also known as King Tut, became pharaoh at a young age and is famous for his intact tomb. Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great, was one of Egypt's most powerful and celebrated pharaohs. The Valley of the Kings was a burial site for many pharaohs of the New Kingdom. Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, had a famous relationship with Roman leaders Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. The ancient Egyptians believed in a pantheon of gods and goddesses, such as Ra, Osiris, Isis, and Anubis. The pyramids were built as tombs for pharaohs and are among the most impressive architectural feats of the ancient world. The Egyptians used a calendar based on the lunar and solar cycles, which influenced the modern calendar. Papyrus, made from the papyrus plant, was used by ancient Egyptians as a writing material. Ancient Egyptian medicine included advanced practices like surgery, dentistry, and the use of herbal remedies. The Egyptians practiced extensive trade with neighboring regions, including Nubia, Punt, and the Levant. Obelisks, tall four-sided pillars, were erected as monuments and often inscribed with hieroglyphics. The Ankh, a symbol resembling a cross with a loop at the top, represented life and immortality. The ancient Egyptians believed in an afterlife and built elaborate tombs to ensure a safe journey for the deceased. The Nile's annual flooding was predictable and essential for agriculture, depositing nutrient-rich silt on the land. The ancient Egyptians domesticated animals such as cattle, sheep, goats, and donkeys. The pharaohs wore a double crown, symbolizing the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. Egyptian art and architecture were highly symbolic and often depicted gods, pharaohs, and daily life. Temples in ancient Egypt were not just places of worship, but also economic and administrative centers. The temple complex of Karnak is one of the largest and most impressive religious structures ever built. The ancient Egyptians believed that the heart was the center of intelligence and emotion. The process of mummification involved removing internal organs, which were placed in canopic jars. The Great Sphinx of Giza is thought to represent the pharaoh Khafra and guards his pyramid complex. The ancient Egyptians developed a sophisticated system of irrigation to manage the Nile's floodwaters. Egyptian society was hierarchical, with the pharaoh at the top, followed by nobles, priests, scribes, craftsmen, and farmers. The Egyptians built massive stone monuments like the pyramids, using simple tools and methods. The ancient Egyptians worshipped many animal gods, including Bastet, the cat goddess, and Horus, the falcon-headed god. The annual flooding of the Nile was celebrated with the festival of Opet. Ancient Egyptian clothing was made from linen, which was produced from the flax plant. The ancient Egyptians used a base 10 numbering system and had advanced knowledge of mathematics and geometry. Egyptian queens played significant roles in politics and religion, often depicted alongside pharaohs. The pharaoh was believed to be the intermediary between the gods and the people. The ancient Egyptians had a rich oral tradition, including myths, legends, and tales. The temples of Abu Simbel, built by Ramses II, were relocated to avoid flooding from the Aswan High Dam. Egyptian burial practices varied over time, but always aimed to ensure the deceased's safe passage to the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians used cosmetics, such as kohl for eye makeup, for both aesthetic and protective purposes. The Nile River was also a crucial transportation route, facilitating trade and communication. The Egyptians developed early forms of toothpaste and breath mints to maintain oral hygiene. The ancient Egyptian military used chariots, bows, and bronze weapons in warfare. The Egyptians had a rich tradition of music and dance. often performed at religious and social events. The ancient Egyptians believed in a soul composed of multiple parts, including the Ka, Ba, and Akh. The Temple of Luxor was dedicated to the god Amun and was a significant religious center. Egyptian priests performed daily rituals to maintain the favor of the gods and ensure cosmic order. The ancient Egyptians built the first known dam, the Sad el-Kafara, around 2700 BCE. The Egyptians developed a complex system of weights and measures for trade and construction. The Egyptian goddess Ma'at represented truth, justice, and cosmic order. The pharaohs were often buried with a wealth of treasures, intended to support them in the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians celebrated numerous festivals, many of which were tied to agricultural cycles. The Egyptians were skilled in metallurgy, producing tools and jewelry from gold, copper, and bronze. The ancient Egyptian language underwent several stages, including Old, Middle, and Late Egyptian. The pharaoh Akhenaten's capital city, Amarna, was abandoned shortly after his death. The Egyptians practiced falconry and revered birds of prey, particularly the falcon. The ancient Egyptians had extensive knowledge of astronomy and used it to align their monuments. The Egyptians created some of the earliest known surgical instruments, including scalpels and forceps. The Temple of Philae, dedicated to Isis, was one of the last active pagan temples in Egypt. Egyptian mythology included a rich pantheon of gods and goddesses, each with distinct roles and stories. The Egyptians brewed beer, which was a staple of their diet and often used as payment for labor. The ancient Egyptians used amulets and charms to protect against evil spirits and bring good fortune. The Egyptians constructed massive stone obelisks, which were often transported long distances. The Great Pyramid of Giza was originally covered in smooth, white Tura limestone casing stones. The ancient Egyptians believed that writing was a gift from the god Thoth. The pharaoh Sneferu built 3 pyramids, refining the techniques used to construct them. The ancient Egyptians domesticated cats, which were revered and often associated with the goddess Bastet. The Egyptians believed that the West was the land of the dead, where the sun set each day. The ancient Egyptians were skilled in the art of weaving, producing fine linen fabrics. The Nile Delta, where the river meets the Mediterranean Sea, was a fertile and densely populated region. The Egyptians built massive stone temples to honor their gods and pharaohs. The ancient Egyptians had a sophisticated understanding of anatomy and physiology. The pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops, commissioned the Great Pyramid of Giza. The ancient Egyptians believed in a cyclical view of time, with events repeating in regular patterns. The Temple of Edfu is one of the best-preserved ancient Egyptian temples, dedicated to the god Horus. The Egyptians used simple machines such as ramps and levers to construct their monumental buildings. The ancient Egyptians developed a system of medicine that included diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment. The Egyptians believed that the heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at in the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians were adept at stone carving, creating intricate statues and reliefs. The pharaoh Thutmose III expanded Egypt's empire to its greatest extent through military conquests. The Egyptians believed that the god Osiris ruled the afterlife and judged the souls of the dead. The ancient Egyptians built the first known lighthouse, the pharaohs of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Egyptians had a deep respect for the Nile, often personifying it as the god Hapi. The pharaoh Amenhotep III oversaw a period of great artistic and architectural achievement. The ancient Egyptians used a variety of tools, including chisels, hammers, and saws in their construction projects. The Egyptian calendar was divided into 3 seasons: Akhet, flooding; Pere, growth; and Shemu, harvest. The ancient Egyptians believed that their gods lived in the temples, where they were cared for by priests. The Egyptians were one of the first cultures to practice monogamy as the standard form of marriage. The ancient Egyptians built the first known zoo, containing exotic animals from their conquests and trade, the pharaoh Seti. I restored many temples and monuments that had fallen into disrepair. The Egyptians believed that their pharaohs would become gods in the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians created detailed maps and surveyed their lands for construction and agriculture. The Egyptians believed that the stars were the souls of the dead, watching over the living.